Okay, so welcome to Pathfinders, episode 2. I know this is more of your thing, but I think that you have a pretty interesting backstory and life, and I figured why not interview you and hear more about how you turned to the George that I know today. So we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking to you about all your past adventures and experiences and family and how you got to where you are now. So I know a lot about you. Obviously, I've known you for years, but there's so much you don't really know about a person and what makes the person who they are. So I kind of wanted to just kind of dig deep into kind of how you grew up and, early childhood, teenage years, and, what makes you George today. One thing I did want to start off with, if it's okay with you, I know that you mentioned that your parents are immigrants, correct? That moved here to America. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first of all, cheers. Cheers to you. This is weird, but it's awesome, and I'm really glad this was y'all's suggestion, and I really appreciate it because giving it a lot of thought, it's like I ought to take my own medicine, right? So it's like if I'm going to sit down and have people trust me with their story, then I should probably trust the rest of the world with my story too. So it's kind of a cool exchange, take it or leave it kind of a thing to pick up what you're serving out, right? So parents are immigrants, yeah. So they famously came over during the Castro Revolution. And that was a pretty fascinating story because my parents were both children at the time. So they were like between 7, 8, kind of years old, 6, 7, 8 years old. And what was going on at the time was, for those that don't know, the Castro came in and he was trying to revolutionize Cuba. And at the time, the problem was they had a sort of dictator leader named Batista. Mm-hmm. And the problem was that guy was kind of running Cuba more like a tourist trap. And so it was in danger. So the people there didn't like the fact that it was turning into basically a giant resort. And there's a lot of sort of corruption, because a lot of things were like bars and, and alcohol and things like that.
Everything that comes with that, yeah.
Right. And so it was a playground for America, and the people that lived there, mixed feelings of it. Obviously, it's good from a tourist perspective, but from a culture perspective, they felt like they were losing their culture. And so Castro swings in and he says, I'm going to help you guys get your sovereignty back, essentially, right? And, piss off America and everything else, right? And he sold the story. But he brings in, like during that revolution, right? He brings in this guy named Che Guevara that all the kids these days wear a t-shirt with this guy's name on it. But this dude's basically like a guerrilla war criminal. Like he is not a good dude, but he was effective in what he did, right? And so people celebrate him in the sense that he was part of the revolution, which cool, good, bad, or indifferent, but not the best dude in the world. Look him up sometime. And so the problem was he takes power, bloody, mini war, coup, blah, 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 secures power. And then everybody's super happy. They're like, sweet, now we're going to go do the thing. And then he turns around and he says, oh, by the way, I'm super sympathetic to like the Communist Party. And so we're just going to go ahead and run everything like a communism. Everybody's like, wait a minute, though. And it was interesting because at the time, he basically had these rules where he was kind of like, oh, you don't like it? If you don't like it, you can leave. You can totally defect to America unless you're a professional. And so he had all these rules and stipulations. So if you were military or you were like a professional, like let's say you were a doctor or whatever, then you weren't allowed to leave. So he basically only wanted, you could leave if you were like worthless. So if you were like homeless, you had a shit job, whatever, yeah, sure, get on a boat and go to America. We don't want you anyways. But everybody else had to stay behind. And so this turned into a scenario where people were having to essentially fake papers. So if you were a professional and you still wanted to defect to America, you had to do some risky shit. You had to fake papers, BS your job to downplay it so that you seemed worthless. And then people were doing things like, oh, and by the way, you weren't allowed to bring anything. So if you left to America, you forfeited everything. You forfeited your property. You forfeited all of your assets, all of your money, everything.
To the government?
Yep. You basically got to walk out of here with a bag full of clothes and your kids, and best of luck to you. And so on both sides of my family, they had to basically fake their papers to essentially come into the country as poor immigrants, even though we had a dentist on one side, and then my grandmother was like later on became like a chemist and things like that. So my parents came across as children during that, and so they both experienced the classic immigrant growing up as starting from nothing, $100 in your pocket kind of stuff.
They weren't allowed to bring anything with them, so they were
Correct.
starting with absolutely nothing
Correct.
in a new country,
Correct.
in a new language.
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, that too. Yeah, exactly. And you're in a country that up until now you were not necessarily a big fan of, if you were on the side of like America's basically just fleecing our culture, and you know what I mean? So now you're going to a country where, yeah, it's the land of opportunity, but you're not exactly friends with these people because they were kind of using your country like a tourist trap, right?
Yeah.
So animosity kind of comes with that territory. And what's interesting is both sides of my family came across, and they didn't know each other. So these are two completely different paths, but just the same time frame of the Castro Revolution. They didn't want to be a part of it, come to America. And what happened was, this is one of the cool aspects of the church, is everybody lands in Miami, that whole area, right? And then they're both Roman Catholic. That's the dominant religion there. And they had religious replacement groups. And so what would happen is, in the church, they would say, okay, well, here's a list of Cuban communities. I'm Cuban American, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Here's a list of cities where a lot of people that are Cuban Americans, they move to, and we have basically support networks.
Community, yeah.
Yep, through the church setup, right? And so both of those families ended up just happening to move to Colorado. And my dad was more in like the Aurora, Colorado area. And then my mom's side of the family moved out to an area called Westminster, Colorado. And this would be the difference of like saying Westminster would be like saying like Round Rock, Texas. And then like Aurora would be like, I don't know, like basically down here, basically like southern, kind of. Anyways, so those two families, those two independent children, my parents grew up, and then they met in high school, and they were going to two different high schools at the time. And they met each other really young at like a function. I forget the exact details, but it was like some community function, again, through the church. And it was like a dance, kind of a social thing. And they met each other. And they met each other when they were like 13, 14 years old. And they, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what a lot of these things are for, is to try to get people in the community to meet each other and whatever. And they stayed together forever. And so
they've been together since they were like 13, 14.
Yeah. So they were together like through high school. So they kind of like remote dated. I mean, it's back in the day, so it's not like you could, until they could drive, it's not like you could like hang out. And then when it came time for college, they played the typical nuclear family style, where it was like my father decided to go to college. He went to DU. And then my mother didn't work because she was basically saying, I'm going to focus on raising the family. And I'm the firstborn of that. And so I myself am like firstborn United States American, Cuban American, and then my parents are immigrants, but their memories of what was actually going on in Cuba is a little less removed than, say, like my grandparents.
Right.
Yep. And so long story short, they had me pretty early on. I mean, I think they were only like 19, 20 years old when they had me. And so my mom just became sort of like the stay-at-home mom, raising the kids. My dad basically busted his ass to try to like not only put himself through college, but then also like work jobs to have the money to pay for the college and for the kids and
take
everything
care of
else.
everybody. So you were the first of how many? How many siblings do you have?
4, 5. Hold on. Me, and Chris, Karina, 5 kids.
Okay.
And the youngest one could be my kid. That's how far removed we are.
Okay, so they had you when they were like 19.
Yeah.
Or you're, so young. So you being the first one
Yeah.
of an immigrant family, how was that for you as far as like growing up, especially if there's a huge age gap too? Usually I find in our culture too, it's usually like the oldest kind of take on the responsibility of all the growing pains when it comes to being an older sibling. I'm not an older sibling, but I witnessed it. But also navigating being in a country that your parents still are trying to learn and understand, and then they have you at such a young age. Like, how was growing up for you?
Yeah. And it was interesting because, again, culturally, there's still a lot of mistrust between those communities, right? The Cuban communities and the Americans. They kind of see Americans as being, you double down. There's the Catholic view of like the sinful American that doesn't care about what they do, you know what I mean? And so, in the eyes of God, they're kind of willy-nilly Wild West. And then there's also the Cuban culture of we're more traditional and reserved and things like that. And they see alcohol culture, drug culture, the way that girls kind of express themselves. This is all not very conservative at all. And so my mom and my dad to some degree, they both had a lot of a sheltered approach to my integration into the world, right? Because it wasn't like I was going to Cuban specific like middle school and high school. I was being integrated into American schools. And so like the first challenge I had to overcome was not even speaking the language, because growing up, my mom was like, you're going to learn Spanish first. That's like the first language you got to learn, which kudos to her. Love it. But when I went into like, kindergarten, I don't think I did preschool. Went into kindergarten, I was behind because I didn't speak. I literally was like sitting there with all my friends, and I'm just speaking Spanish, and they're just kind of like, no idea what you're talking about, dude.
I don't talk about kid.
Yeah. But shout out to Mrs. Straight, because that woman at that school like literally worked with me, and she became like that one teacher was probably one of the most pivotal people in all of our lives, because she stayed at that same school for my childhood upbringing or my kindergarten experience, and all of our siblings. She worked there for like 30 or 40 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so after me, she already knew like, oh, okay, cool. Here comes another Garcia, and they're not going to speak very good English, and blah, 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 right.
Well, it's good. It's good to have a teacher who's like patient and, helps navigate you.
Yep.
I don't know much about Roman Catholicism.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that really affected you growing up too. Is it like super strict? What kind of beliefs do they have, and how did that affect you like growing up?
It's supposed to be a lot on the stricter side, right? So it's a lot of like, for instance, like nowadays, like women can be deacons and things like that. Not so much in that world. This is a little more closely tied to like what you would see in like actual Rome, like because the Spanish were the ones that initially landed and conquered Cuba, and so Roman Catholicism, like the Orthodox sort of like Roman Catholicism was the one that got established there, and so it's just very traditional things like. They believe in things like, no masturbation, alcohol is basically the devil, and gambling, like all that other stuff. And then they also have all the different sacraments that they take very seriously. So for instance, like baptism, super important, or else your kid is basically like doomed to burn. First communion, confirmation, which is similar to what you had to go through, where it's like now you're kind of old, you're still a teenager, but you're old enough to like reaffirm that you want to be in the religion.
You make that choice. And
and it's the same thing. Like confirmation is like you go through classes for that whole thing. So it's a stricter version of the religion that doesn't have a whole lot of leeway for some of the things that other denominations tend to have, especially in a modern day.
So your parents didn't drink or anything like that, or okay?
Hell no. and especially since kind of uncorking a little bit about like more on my mom's side. So my dad was a single child, and my mom was one of two. So she has her brother Lee, and her mom. Speaking on the alcohol thing, right? So her mom was a fascinating woman. I wish I knew this woman longer. So my grandma back in Cuba was what would you call it, like an orator? Like she was basically like a recitalist. So she was super artsy, and she would do these things where she would do these like poetry readings. Like
awesome.
We're talking like on stage with people and like music and shit like that.
Your mom's mom?
Yeah. Yeah, so she does these like poetry readings and things like that. And as she was older and kind of like a little more senile, you get a little pina colada in her, and she would start just like she would go into like act mode and we have all these home videos of her. We had this little speaker thing set up, and she's got the microphone, and she's just going through these things, right? And everybody in the family is kind of ignoring her, because it's kind of like she does this all the time, kind of a thing. But now I look back on those things, and those things are so precious to me, because I'm like, oh my god, that woman was like just on fire. But the downside of that was she was a very aloof, passionate person, and in her later life, got a little bit into the drink and stuff. And it wasn't like she was like a abusive alcoholic person, but it was just, I think my mom growing up, seeing her on her sloppy days, let's just say, right? It was never terrible, but seeing her on her sloppy days, it kind of reaffirmed for my mom that alcohol is a problematic substance. And so I can empathize where she would have then taken that to say, well, my kids probably should just stay the hell away from that stuff.
Yeah.
My dad was impartial to it. My dad grew up, he did corporate jobs and things like that. So he was aware of like happy hours. That's just a normal thing or whatever. He was never much of a drinker himself, but also because, I think funny story. So this one time we're doing barbecue, and my dad wants to try beer brats for the first time. So the dude literally brings home like the cheapest can. I mean, it was like the black with the white label, like it just says beer on the side. And all he wanted to do was just pour some shit in the bratwurst, right? And my mom was like, what? She was just like lost her shit about this beer that my dad brought home. And she's like, are you going to start drinking? And he's like, no, it's just for the beer brats. She's like, oh, okay. So it was like that level of like panic over that stuff, right? And so growing up, I guess long-winded, circling back to your conversation is, growing up, I was the guinea pig for how do I integrate my children into an American culture that seems fast and loose with a lot of its moralities.
Right.
And so I was often told boogeyman stories. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? About the dangers of even, not even once, don't even take a sip or don't even take a hit or anything like that, because it's basically gonna. And it doesn't help that at the time. Right, so I was born in the late 70s, right? And in the 80s, like the Dare programs that you see all the old jokes about, right? That was in a big swing of things, right? America even was trying to double down during the Reagan eras of basically saying, dare to, don't even try it. This is your brain on drugs, right? With the right? Yep. And so that culture they were trying to clean up their act as far as like the American culture, and that would just reinforce a lot of this stuff. So I was brought up told to stay away from so much in the world.
Everything's kind of like fear driven, or it's really, really
100%.
Extremely bad. I mean, I understand because I grew up similar to that. And it affects everything you do, even in school. We weren't even allowed to eat a cupcake if it was for someone's birthday, because it was like, you just don't do that. Like, then you're yeah, exactly. It's a gateway to like, Satan or whatever. But that's how people who grow up in like high controlled religions, it's even the littlest things that it becomes such an extreme thing, like beer brats. It's that is an extreme thing. You know what I mean? So that's really interesting, because I don't know anything about the religion itself. Curious though, so you said that you went to public school, and then did you end up going to like a Roman Catholic school?
So it was a Catholic school from middle school, so that would be kindergarten to 8th grade. It was called Holy Trinity. It's on Westminster, and that was so. But it was an American school, so it wasn't like a community school like that only had like Hispanic kids. In fact, I was one of the only like 3 Hispanic kids in the entire school. And what's funny about Hispanic or like Catholic schools is there's 2 kinds of kids that go to Catholic schools. There's the kids that are trying to grow up Catholic, and then there's the really bad kids that their parents don't know what to do with them because they've gotten kicked out of public school, and so they Catholic think. School.
Yeah. Jesus saved my child. Yeah.
And so what do you think happens is that those kids teach the other kids like all of the.
You?
No, I was the learner. I was like, the first nudie magazine I ever saw was because one of my kids at the Catholic school brings it to school, and he's like, hey, look at what my dad's got. I was like, I've never seen this before. You know what I mean? So it's just it's ironic that you would think that like a school that's supposed to be designed around religion
just separate you from the other cultures. Yeah.
It cuts both ways, right? Yeah, no. So that was until 8th grade, and then when I went to high school, I went full public school. I went to the same high school that my cousin went to.
Did you have a hard time integrating from like that school to high school, or was it kind of like the same thing?
Dude, I was so refreshed. It was refreshing, and much to my mom's chagrin, because it was more freedom. So the thing about me was like. One thing that we can underscore on any of this stuff is that I probably wasn't the easiest kid to bring up, because I was a curious child by nature. Like it wasn't like an oppression thing where like, I finally just like snapped and said, give me my life back. I've been curious my entire life. Like I was the kid that like, you give me like Legos or like a Transformers, I would throw the instructions away because I wanted to just figure this shit out on my own. And even if it was wrong, I still wanted to just do it by myself.
Totally see that. You.
It's a blessing and a curse, right? It has its place, and then there's some places where you really should just shut the fuck up and like just learn how to do it the right way. And so I fully admit that I was probably a problem child in that regard. But so when you're that kind of a kid by nature, and then your mom says, "Stay away from this stuff over here," my brain immediately goes, What's over there? Yeah. And then you can imagine, now this is much later, like in high school, when you finally start to experiment with like, somebody's mom's box wine, that or a wine cooler, right? I started, experimenting with stuff, and I was like, this really isn't as crazy as my mom was making it sound like. She made it sound like I take one sip of this glass and now I'm just
You're
like
in a
ready to
ditch
jump off a
somewhere.
cliff because I
Yeah.
believe I can fly, right? And so that kind of began sort of like it was probably like 14, 15 years old that my brain finally started to shift from like, wait a minute, I don't think my parents like understand the whole story about how life works. And it
Right.
wasn't something that I could appreciate until much later in life. That when I look back on it, it's precisely because they were married so young. So they're 13, 14 years old. So they just, kudos to them. They knocked it out of the damn park. They met each other and they didn't have to go through any trials and tribulations. But that means that their life experiences are also going to just by nature be limited.
And going
Right.
back to that, being young, being immigrants, and being super religious, all those things. You being the oldest child to the first. I mean, how was like and then also being the child who goes against the grain more, like your personality. How was your guys' relationship like growing up? Were you just kind of like, oh, my kid Mijo, like he needs Jesus or something? Or how was your relationship with your mom and dad? Or were you like considered like, the one that was always getting in trouble, like the tough kid, like the black sheep, or
No. I was always getting in trouble. I talked too damn much. So like, so I spent a lot of time sitting by the wall at recess instead of playing with the kids because I would get in trouble. Because when I got to school, I was so interested. Like I actually love talking to people and I love hanging out with my friends and things like that. And so part of the problem too was I would get bored in class. So like if the teacher was going over something that I already kind of understood, like I did the homework or whatever, but she's basically just going over it again, then I would immediately get distracted and just want to turn to my friends and start talking to them or start passing notes and shit, right? So I spent a lot of time getting in trouble in that regard, but I wasn't necessarily like, I didn't really have like, I wasn't like against authority or anything like that. I was just a very just aloof kid, right? And so my relationship with my parents in that regard was somewhat adversarial because they wished that I would just behave right, as all parents do or whatever. But it wasn't like I was constantly getting into trouble or putting them in awkward positions every once in a while, right?
Yeah.
And we
You're
can
a
get
kid.
into but where a lot of the conflict actually came from was being the oldest of my siblings, because that was the problem. Was you've got parent authority figures that are basically preaching a zero tolerance, don't even try it kind of a thing. And now there's this older brother that goes off and experiments with this kind of stuff. And when he comes back, he's doing okay. This creates a little bit of a dissonance in the messaging, right?
Right.
And so this adversarial stuff was more between what I was allowed to convey to my siblings about my engagement with things that were supposed to be off limits,
Right.
more than anything that I was doing to get in trouble in the general world.
They were
And
afraid of your influence
my influence.
on the younger kids.
Right. Right. And I mean, behind closed doors, they would tell me when I was older as high school, it's like, it's not that we don't think that you're going off and like going to go and end up in a ditch somewhere. It's just that maybe you can handle those kinds of things, but if you paint them in too good of a light for your siblings, maybe they can't handle it. And I don't know. I was always, good, bad, or indifferent. I don't have kids, so I can't judge either way, but I've always been one of those people where it's like, if you don't expose yourself if you don't expose yourself in some ways and at least consider certain threats or opportunities that could go one way or the other, then how do you know what you're going to do?
Did it ever stop you from like taking new opportunities? Just like the voice of like your mom and your dad in the back of your head?
Yeah, a couple times. And it was mostly because, my mom was the more reactionary one, obviously. And then my dad was always kind of behind the scenes, just being like, just try not to piss your mom off too much. You know what I mean? Like, because then, if she's mad, then the whole family's mad. It's a very,
Well, your dad's also, the breadwinner of the family, so he's probably not around a lot
Yep.
if your mom's not working and she's
Oh, yeah.
raising the kids. So that kind of makes it,
yep.
a more difficult relationship or bonding with your father when he's gone all the time. So you're just kind of with your mom and then, with the
100%.
kids, with your brothers and sisters and things.
Yeah, 100%. And that's a really good point. So like, my dad growing up he was very much a role model in terms of like he handled his shit, but if I'm being honest, he didn't have the time to be as like fatherly as he probably could have been. You know what I'm saying? Because he was so busy working or handling stuff out in the world, right? And it wasn't like he was just off like hanging out with his buddies and doing happy hours and shit like that, right? It was just, sometimes he would work. I mean, you have to remember, this is back in the day where there's no such thing as telework. Nobody had internet. So your happy ass has to get in a car with a briefcase of papers and drive however god long it is to get to work in rush hour traffic, do your 8 hours, and then make it home at some point. So my dad's waking up at like 7 o'clock in the morning, dropping us off at school, and then going to a full job, an entire day's worth of shit, and then he doesn't get home until like 7, 8 o'clock. So he just by the virtue of what he had to do, because he worked downtown. Sorry, that's the other caveat, which is like 1 hour one way in traffic, right? So just by that virtue, my mom was the one that was basically stuck having to basically teach us everything. And when my dad would get home, you probably had days like that where you're just so mentally cashed from all the stuff that you've dealt with at work that when you get home, you just want to like
shut down kind of.
Yeah, you don't want to come home to like the screaming kids and the mom being like, you'll never believe what George did this time. You know what I mean? Like all those stresses or whatever, you just want to tune that shit out, right? So it wasn't that he was ever like a bad dad. It's just that there was not a lot of freedom and opportunity for him to do that because he had that as his main function, I guess.
Right.
And so he was a dad on the weekends. He was like the cool one, that would kind of come in at the last minute and do stuff. And my mom had to be sort of like the stern hand and also the teacher for a lot of things, right?
And I'm sure that kind of made you feel not necessarily like resentment, because my dad worked, my mom didn't, and so and he was around when he could, but he's a builder, so when he'd come home, he has like stuff all over his face and he's exhausted and all these things, and he doesn't necessarily want to be playing with us or anything like that. But as a girl, I always had my mom, so she's the one like teaching me all these things, whatever. But I imagine as a boy with your dad, that's a whole different relationship that I don't understand, but I'm sure that part of growing up to become like the man that you want to be, you want to have influence from your dad. You want him to be the one showing you things. You want him to be the one teaching you things. And when he's not around to do that, maybe that's why you are, the way you are. Then you kind of just figure stuff out yourself because you kind of didn't have a choice, because it's not like your mom was going to do that for you. So that's kind of why
that's
you tinker with everything,
That's 100% good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, that's 100%. That's like, that's why like my, the little moniker that I adopted was kind of Ronin, right? Which is like, you're masterless, when you have no teacher to show you how something's done. And we don't live in a world anymore of like the mentorship, right? Mentorship is something that we should probably bring back. So when you're out there and you have to just figure shit out, also being the oldest, right? Mm-hmm. So advice is limited. And even if my dad was around, let's say that he was, let's say that he was a writer and so he could work at home or whatever the hell. There again, these are two people that met when they were like 13 and 14 years old. What are their life experiences actually? What is their sage advice that they've actually experienced firsthand? It's going to be limited. It's just going to be limited. And I wasn't so lucky. Like you dated and had my heart broken, all these things that they have nothing in their lexicon to convey other than to just empathetically look at it and say, well, that sucks, make better choices, or she must just not have been good for you, right? What do you say when you haven't ever been in those situations?
It's true. I didn't think about that because they never had like heartbreak because they've been together since the get-go.
Yeah.
And this whole time.
Isn't that weird?
That is.
It's cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's harder for you when you're going through things like, well, I don't know. Yeah. You'll be fine. Like, you know what I mean? Because what else can you can't relate to that.
And then, and all the tropes come out, right? Because I'm dating girls that are American. And so of course the problem is that you're just not dating a good Cuban girl. You need to go find yourself. I was like, where are these girls at? I don't know. And B, spoiler alert, not really attracted, unfortunately. Like you've seen my wife. It was just never. It was just never my thing. Sorry, but but that is sort of that defining moment of like realizing at a very young age that if I wanted to figure out how to do some shit, I pretty much had to just go and do it and figure it out and fail fast and just keep trying and learn from who I could and mimic other people and do whatever I could, because there was just not a whole lot of opportunities to get that advice from other people.
And it is a different time because I think about it now. Me and my husband, we don't have like father figures in our lives, and we YouTube everything. Some breaks in the house with our car, whatever, because we don't have that either. But living in a different time, being younger, like not having all of that, like learning the hard way, like that's a tough thing to do. And then you being the oldest and your siblings are kind of looking up to you and like navigating their life kind of through your mistakes, or you know what I mean, things that you're trying. And it's just a different time. You know what I mean? Like you don't have all the outlets that kids who don't maybe have you know, someone in their life kind of showing them things and doing stuff for them. Like there's so many outlets now. I mean, everywhere.
Yeah.
And at that time, you're kind of just figuring it out. And, you know, also, I know that you kind of went against the grain as far as like the religion. I'm sure you had your own reasons, like why you're kind of like, this is maybe not for me. But that also kind of leaves you open to like just you having to be the first one to try everything in your family. That's a lot of pressure. And then, you know, if you do make a mistake, it to be blamed on, well, it's because you're not doing it this way, because that's all they know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Damn, I never even thought about that. I think I'm probably the first person in my family to like walk away from the religion.
So your siblings
Legit,
are
straight up, because
still...
of all, I mean, across everybody in my family, all my uncles, everybody is religious. I think I was the first one to walk away from that shit. That's crazy. I never thought about that. And it was one of the, so a couple of funny stories, right? So the earliest inklings that I got about the religion side of it, story number one was, I'm probably fourth grade. I'm young, right? And at the school, they used to have hot lunch weeks sometimes. So if your parents just send you to school with the little money of envelopes, and you got your little ticket, and then that Friday they would do hot lunch, and it was usually some like Sunny Delight in a giant orange cooler and like a ham sandwich. You know what I mean? But damn it was cool as shit. And if you were the cool kids, you got the hot lunch. You didn't have to show up with like your little brown bag of whatever, right? And so I walk in this day, and it's hot lunch, and I've got my ticket, and I get my plate, and I sit down, and I'm sitting across from my friend Virgil. Shout out Virgil, I love you, buddy. And Virgil's sitting there, and he's got nothing, and I was like, "What's wrong, dude?" And he's like, "Oh man, I didn't realize that I didn't basically pay for my hot lunch, or I didn't get it in time." He's like, the lunch lady told me I don't got a coupon. And I was like, "Oh, damn, that sucks." And I was like, "You didn't bring a lunch?" He's like, "No, because I thought I had a lunch." I'm like, "Oh, shit." So then I looked at my stuff, and I was like, "Well, you can just have my chips. Like, I'm still going to eat the other stuff, but here, at least take this, right?" So not even 2 seconds after I hand this dude this, like, bag of chips, like Ruffles, the nun comes walking over, and she goes, to her credit, she thinks that he, like, bullied me out of the chips. So she walks up with the attitude, like, "Give those chips back," to him. Mm-hmm. And he's like, "Oh," and he like pushes them back over, and then she looks at me like she's doing me a favor. And so then I'm like, "Oh, no, it's cool, lady. Like, no. He doesn't have a lunch. I'm giving these to him. He's not bullying me or whatever." And she was like, "No." And I was like, and she goes, "If his parents can't remember whether or not they provided him with everything that he needs to get his lunch, then he can sit there and think about that. And his parents will learn a lesson from this."
Sounds Christ-like.
That was exactly what I said. And I got in so much trouble. So I go,
wow.
I'm a little kid, right? And so I go, "Wouldn't Jesus give him the chips?" Straight up. And that woman, it was like a cartoon. I could see the red. I could see the red like a thermometer, just like, "Ooh," and she was immediately like, office. We both got in trouble. So I'm sitting in this office, and I'm sitting in the office like I'm kind of crying to myself a little bit, because I am legitimately troubled, because I'm sitting there going, "Wouldn't Jesus give him the chips?" Like, yeah. I don't understand what the fuck, like, why couldn't I get a straight answer to this, right? And this is one of my proudest moments actually from my mom. So I'm sitting outside the office, and it's like, 2 chairs outside in the hallway, because that's the shame, right? Is they put you in the damn hallway to show that you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And now lunch lets out, and all them kids are walking by, and they're looking like, "What'd you do?" And I'm just like, "Wouldn't Jesus give him the chips?" I don't. So I could hear the principal in the office, and she's on the phone. She's calling my parents. She gets a hold of my mom. And it's blah, blah, blah. "You need to come get your kid." He's mouthing off. He's basically talking back to our staff, or to the nun or whatever, right? Whatever. And that was the principle, was like, it was just the fact that I talked back. But she's purposely leaving out what the nature of the conversation was. So probably 30 minutes later, we lived kind of far from our school. So 30, 40 minutes later, my mom rolls in, and so she's got me by the hand, and she's kind of looking at me like, "What'd you do?" Right? Because she also knows that I, don't always follow the rules. And she's like, what are you in trouble for now? And she goes, so what did he say? And so it's the principal and then the nun lady standing there. And so they explain what happened straight, but they explain what happened. Like, can you believe he said that? And my mom goes, wouldn't Jesus give him the chips? And I was in myself, I was like, I mean, I was sitting there like, like, I don't want to get in trouble. But inside I was like, oh yes, thank you, Mom. Thank you. Y'all are bad people.
Exactly.
And my mom was just like, I'm glad that he said that. And you all basically read on the riot act. And she's like, let's go. I still got in trouble. I still had a 2-day suspension or whatever the fuck it was.
That is the craziest thing.
That was the first inkling. That put me on a trajectory to where when that was the first time I saw religion as a method of control more than the message that it's trying to deliver.
And hypocrisy.
At that age. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That it was like, oh, I see. We're all playing a game where everybody plays by the rules, but it's really just an authority thing. It's I'm in charge.
I mean, it
You're not.
It starts off all like kudos to you for doing that, by the way, because that's something I probably would do. But it starts with the fact that like even at school in general, like if a kid doesn't have money for food, you're just not going to feed him, and then get mad at him for someone sharing. That is like the least. I mean, I'm not religious now, but like that's like the most like least Jesus Christ like thing to do. You would give him what you have. That's what That's crazy. But that's a perfect example. Even at a young age, you were just like, this is bullshit. Because you saw it from immediately. Like this makes how can you justify that in fourth grade? It doesn't make any sense. Even your fourth grade mind knew that was bullcrap. You know what I mean? So, and kudos for your mom for having your back too.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
That was that's one of my favorite memories of that whole situation, because then it was like, wow, cool. So there's also a teachable moment there too, where that was also one of the earliest times that I saw disagreements amongst adults. And this is a weird one, right? Is like, one thing I always have to try to think back on is the idea that when you're a kid, you assume that adults have everything figured out. And it takes a long time for you to realize that adults are just giant children too, and they don't know what the fuck's going on either. It's just a lot of them don't want to admit that. Mm-hmm. Some of them do, a lot of them don't. And so when you realize that adults can be imperfect as well, that was the first time that I saw sort of like a disagreement between authority figures, because there's my mom standing there, and then there's the principal and the lunch lady nun, and they're having a disagreement about a fundamental something that I thought I just missed the message, or I didn't see it right, and I realized, oh wow, there's a difference of opinion even at that level, and that was another influential thing that kind of resonated when as I got older and I got into having to do other kinds of disputes within my family. That was one of the things that I was cognizant of, was that adults really are trying to figure shit out too. Yeah. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you're 7, 8, 9 years old and you assume that they've got it all figured out.
All the answers.
Yeah. And if you just follow their lead, then you'll be good too. Right.
To not change the subject, but so I know that obviously you're not, religious now. Did you have to, when you got out of school, did you have to like do any like formal like leaving the church, or how does that work for?
It was a fade.
Okay.
To use.
So you just stopped going to
it's
church.
It's a fade away thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And way less aggressive than what you went through. Like they don't try to. It's more like they soft influence, right? My parents continue to go to the same church, and so they're like, where's George? Kind of a thing. And they're like, oh, he's busy, blah blah blah. But they don't aggressive try to pry. So whatever they said at the time, where it's like, oh, he's just busy or whatever, that's sold. And they know that that's just the nature of the beast. So
and your parents were kind of okay with that, or?
They weren't super thrilled. I mean, again, it's so funny because it's like, as Catholic as they are, I also got the sense that they were still going to this church because it was a Catholic church, but there's still that outsider Cuban mentality of like, well, this church isn't all that perfect anyway. It's not like the church is back home. Yeah. This is a recurring theme, right? Is that like we're participating in these systems, right? Healthcare, the government, we're participating in these systems, but back home we really had it figured out. And it's like, well, back home sucks.
Right.
Cuba's not like the model
but
for very much. They
left at a young age. Like they have this illusion in their head that it was something that it really, wasn't anymore. Right.
So even the way that my parents went to church, it wasn't like a devout, like every damn Sunday or whatever. It was more like they went often, and even they saw like sort of a little bit of like the, dang, y'all pass around that collection plate a little too often, so they had their own kind of things about it. But a lot of it was they enjoyed the fellowship fellowship and they enjoyed just being around other people and they enjoyed just taking that quiet time to like pray and reflect on all that other stuff. So, so it was less of a big deal in my life when I started fading out. And quite frankly, even when I walked away, so what's funny is I still went through the confirmation. So I did not want to go through confirmation, but it was like, that's like 16 or whatever when you do that.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, because
same age as me.
Yeah, because that's what they're trying to do, right? Is they're basically, you're about to become an adult, so they're trying to lock you in and make you say the words. Because until then, you're just following what your parents say, right? Religion is stand up, sit down, kneel, and copy everything else. But now this is them, the church putting the microphone in front of you and saying, you believe in God, right? Yeah. And you have to be like, yup, right? And so they have classes, confirmation classes. There's an entire ceremony. Yeah. You have like this magic rosary that becomes like your thing, right? So there's a lot of indoctrination that happens in that moment. And even still, like while I was going through confirmation, I was kind of like, this is going to be really awkward when I don't follow through on any of this stuff, but I don't want to make anybody mad. So I guess we'll just roll with it.
I mean, at least you didn't have like dire consequences as far as, that goes. You got to kind of choose what you.
Yeah, there were no visitations, thank God, because that would have gone about the same way that it went with you. I'd have been like, get out.
Yeah, peace.
Get out.
This don't work for me no more.
I cast you out.
So, as far as your siblings go, so you're the oldest of. So there's 5 of you all together.
Yeah,
so
4 more.
You said the youngest one, you said could be your son. So what age are your siblings?
So I'm 46. He's like 25, 26. So there's 20 years apart difference with us, right? All the rest of us are within like 2 or 3 years. So it was like, there's like me, then my brother. Like I think when I was a senior, he was just entering and becoming a freshman. So there's about 3 or 4 years in between each leg of that. And honestly, like my 2, I think like Karina and Chris are like the closest together. So there's one sister and then the rest of them are boys. And then by the time I got to Alex, that one's an interesting thing that I want to talk about later because that's a kid that by the time that he came into this world, I'm already 20 years old. And I'm at the point now where I'm about to move to Texas because this is all happening in Colorado. And so he becomes the one sibling that I'm the most estranged to just because I didn't grow up with him.
Right.
And so all he's ever seen is sort of like the legends and the stories of George that are being told 20 years in the past, right? And so that was an interesting was like seeing him grow up through pictures and things like that and being able to talk to him every once in a while. And sure, like I go back home and visit, so it wasn't like I was ignoring or nothing like that, but it is not the same level of like growing integrated sibling that you did get like between like my other siblings that we've known. We've like been in this shit together like growing up kind of a thing.
What's your relationship now with everybody?
So my next brother down ended up becoming sort of like, self-proclaimed like black sheep of the family. And part of that was because of, so remember I told you like when I was going off and experimenting with things, I'm the oldest, he's the next one down. And so all this stuff that I'm going off and doing on my own and experimenting with alcohol and meeting friends and talking to girls and things like that, my mom doubled down and was trying to overprotect Aaron. And basically a lot of that messaging was like, if I got in trouble or something bad happened or whatever, it would be like a, almost like a C, don't be like that, because your brother is just one step away from throwing his life away. And so he bit into that. He like followed along. And so he restrained himself from living a lot of life by taking what my mom and my dad said to heart about my actions. And the thing that pains me about my relationship with my brother is that I've always just wanted to be like cool with him. Because when we were kids, when we were like little kids, I was always so excited. I'm like, oh, cool, I got a little brother. Like I was not like the jealous, like, now I got to share the limelight. I was always like, let's go play G.I. Joes, right? But it was always kind of this thing where it's like he's a couple years younger than me, so the things that I started getting into, he's not really into yet. So I'm into G.I. Joes, and he's still like, tumbling building blocks and shit. You know what I mean? And then he's into G.I. Joes, but now I'm into like Transform. So it was always kind of like a little out of phase. But I wanted nothing but to just be like super cool with my brother. But because of that sort of like that upbringing wall between my actions and his actions as I got older, that created that kind of a situation. And then what ended up happening with him, good, bad, or indifferent, is he finally sort of had a renaissance period on his own. So he's held back, he's held back from having these experiences and things like that. And then finally he gets to where he's like 18, 19, 20 years old. And this happens a lot, right? Where like the kid that never experienced any of that stuff gets a taste, and now he's an adult and he can go do it. And he went like, whew, full on. So like he had more tattoos than I did at half my age. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So he started like meeting a bunch, and his whole thing was he got into like the punk rock lifestyle, right? Which is like, you know, like the Black Flag and the rants, like all the stuff that like the London punk rock, anti-establishment, you know, kind of stuff. That was his shtick, which, I mean, you know, he's a kid from suburban Thornton, right? So it's like, it wasn't like he was actually growing up in the slums of London. However, that's just what he identified with, because, you know, he was in some cases rebelling against sort of like a overly sheltered upbringing.
Yeah.
So he did sort of like a 180. And while that was going down, that's another thing that I feel guilty for being somewhat absent for, because by the time that he was that age, I was also, you know, living on my own, not as engaged with my family, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, that my relationship with him is like, we're cool for a little while, but he can be very competitive in nature, as far as like, if I say Xbox, he says PlayStation. If I say fucking Honda, he says Ford. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very much like I pick my team, and if my team is against your team, then I can't even meet in the middle, as far as like, can we just both agree that they're cool cars? Can we just both agree that they're good like gaming systems? He's very hard set in the things that he chooses to believe in, and then doesn't like to have a whole lot of engaged debate about how to like come to terms with things.
I mean, it could be too, like he might have like naturally like some resentment, you know, because you got to do all these things, and because of that it affected him, or how your parents treated him.
That's
and
fair.
Like overly protective, and that's why, I mean, I did the same thing when I got freedom. I was like, woo, like doing stuff that I would never normally do, but because like you just felt so just enabled to just voice your own opinion, make your own choices, dress how you want, represent yourself how you want. And then when you get any freedom, sometimes you meet the wrong people and you start thinking, you know, whatever. And then you go on the totally opposite end of what you normally would do. And then as you get older, you think like they go through all these hardships because of that. And they might sometimes like, you know, even I wanted someone to like blame when bad things happen to me. I'm like, well, this would have never happened if someone taught me about sex education. This would have never happened if someone told me about this. But like, because of how I grew up, like you can't help but feel sometimes like, man, I wish I just had more opportunities to like learn then, so I'd have to actually make the mistakes, you know, afterward. I mean, I don't have like a relationship really with my siblings now, but I did notice that there was things that they were allowed to do that I wasn't. Then again, they were boys, I was a girl. But even like when it came to like religious things, like they were given more opportunities just to be who they were, and I never got to do that. And yeah, you kind of do feel like growing up, like, why do they get to do all these things and I can? And then you just like subconsciously you start like projecting like this energy on. I'm not saying that's what happened with you and your brother, but sometimes that could be, you know,
it's reasonable,
an issue. And as time goes by, it doesn't really get like completely repaired.
Yeah, no, that's totally reasonable. And you know, we've had a couple of knockdown, drag out arguments where, you know, he cites situations where he feels like I was like mean to him and stuff, and I really try to think back to those, and I'm like, I mean, maybe that I can't change your perception of how things took it, but. Right. Yeah, and you know, and that bears speaking, right? It's like we're getting into family stuff, and I just want to preface everything that I say with like, you know, I'm as flawed as anybody else. Like I'm standing in the shade that I'm casting for every leg that I walk it. But you know, perception is a motherfucker, and there's certain things where you have to just get around the fact that when kids see behaviors, especially as we talk about my parents and stuff, right? It's like, kids don't have the complete picture of what's happening at that parental level in all cases. And so I can only speak to things from that perception. And I'm sure that there's a lot of instances where I might feel like my mom or my dad were treating me harshly in a certain situation. But what I don't understand is like the dynamics of what was happening at the adult level. And that's just to put that out there to say that everything that I'm talking about here, it comes from a place of love, and it's also a thing where I'm at a point now where the only reason why I can even sit down and have this podcast is because I've resolved all those inner demons with I've defeated all those internal demons that I can speak to them and face them in an open conversation, because they no longer, that those aspects no longer run my life.
Right.
And I can only hope that upon everybody else as well.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of situations where maybe I wasn't the coolest dude in the world and I had bad days just like anybody else, but it was never, none of this stuff was ever out of any kind of malice or anything against my parents. I never had anything against my parents. They did their best to try to provide for me.
Right.
And there's only so much you can do when you're 19 with a kid in college, single income family in the 80s, where there's not a whole lot of fucking creature comforts and internet and driving, having to drive everywhere. I can only imagine.
And I'm glad you said that, because I feel like whenever it's such a touchy subject when you talk about your own like personal life experiences, and it involves people like in your family and things like that, because there's so much love and there's but realistically, like, you have your own experiences, your own perspective of things, and things happen that affected your childhood or affect your life, and that's okay and maybe you didn't have the full story. They're having their own experiences, their own life. You're just happening to be on a parallel track with them, like just trying to figure it out. And it's not about talking bad about anybody or whatever, but it's just about being open and having your own perspective and being able to express how you feel about something that you yourself experienced, and people just happen to be part of that story, and they have their own experiences as well, and they can talk about that, but you're not trying to be like, it's not about a negative conversation. It's being about open about, we all have our own stories, and we're all, experiencing things, and it makes us who we are. And that's part of why, you are the way you are, because all the things that you experience and things that you say, okay, this doesn't work for me. I don't want to be this way, so I'm going to choose this path. Like, everybody has that. So I'm glad that you said that, because it's not about.
Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes you have to stare at the scar, even if you don't open the wound. You know what I'm saying? And like, you can't spend so many people in this world. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast so bad, is because there's so many times that people think that if I have a scar, then I got to cover it up. And I don't, I have to project that everything in my life is flawless and everything's just been cool. And maybe I might touch stuff, but that's not how growth actually happens. Like, growth happens staring things in the face and getting even just to the point where it's agree to disagree with even open issues.
Right.
Agree to disagree, but we've at least projected what we want to say about it, and you understand what we feel, and I understand you understand what I'm feeling. Then that's cool, because at the end of the day, that's all we want to be as human beings. We just want to be understood.
Right.
Whether you agree or disagree, or where you feel that I'm in fault or you're in fault, we just want to be understood.
You just want to be seen. Mm-hmm. Like, like, really seen is someone who really like understands like everything you've been through and been like, okay, this makes sense. Like, I see you. And if you don't open up, I feel like if you don't open up and give people the opportunity, like, you can never really be seen, because you're hiding. So you're 100%. Hiding a part of you. And I get some people do that because, it's like a self-preservation like thing that they do, but I think that I'm happy that you're talking to me about it, because, there's so many things about you I didn't know. And so, but it makes sense, because you're like the most, like, I swear, if ever like a zombie apocalypse happened or anything, I'm telling everyone, like, go to George's house. Like, him and Andy, they got you. Like, they are the smartest, equipped people. Like, they will save your life. But but it makes sense, because like, you figured all that stuff out for yourself. Like, you could build anything and do anything, you know what I mean? Like, you're into some really cool stuff now, and like, it's all based on like the little things that made you that way. You know what I mean?
I'll take the compliments. Yeah, at least I know how to approach solving the problem. I do not have all the answers, but I have a pretty good idea as to what we ought to do. Yeah. So I mean, rounding out my siblings then, right? So that's my brother, right? And so that was sort of a Cain and Abel sort of a situation in that regard. And it's one that even to this day, like, I really hope that we can get to the point where we're just good and we can just chill. And we mostly are. I mean, like, we communicate decently nowadays, and the flare-ups are like almost none. So that's whatever. That affected me more growing up, because it was just tough to like want to have like that little brother, and it's like, let's go be, two little troublemakers and go off and do stuff. And it just didn't pan out that way. Then you got my sister, this poor woman. Not only is she like the only girl amongst all the boys, right? So she had to kind of grow up doing tomboy stuff. Like, she didn't want to play softball. She was like, I want to play baseball with the boys. And she did good too. She was badass. Anyways, but emotionally, she has been, right? So, my parents, we'll get into it, but my parents, rocky start, like as far as like any young couple that's trying to figure shit out, right? Like, and you're 19, your damn brain isn't even done being developed, and now here you are trying to raise a family, right? Me moving away, right? Like as far as like moving out at an early age, moved out when I was like 17, 18 years old, and then also being in Texas, right? So my sister in a lot of cases had to kind of step in and become like the emotional heart of trying to keep everybody together, especially as drama arises. And she is one of those people that like super cares about everybody around her. She's a teacher. I mean, like just, you know, like mother of the year kind of a thing. She's got 2 beautiful children now. My nieces, they're sharp, brilliant girls, and I can't wait to engage with them more when they're older. But growing up, she was always very socially aware. And so, you know, one of the roles that I always had to fill was if mom and dad were like fighting about dumb shit, then I was the distracting kid as the oldest. My job was to literally like hustle them out, like, oh, dad got home and mom's not pleased. So hey guys, let's all go outside and like go, you know, let's do ninja training, you know what I mean? But my sister was always, I could fool my brothers. My 4 brothers would be like, yeah, let's go do the thing. But my sister would always kind of be like, you know, like looking at them like, why are they, you know, she was super sensitive and aware of that
saw
stuff.
more, maybe, or like an empath to the energy and the
Yeah. That is her to a T. And so she's, so my relationship with her is great. And I think, that's yet another regret is like when I moved away, I felt like her and I were super, super close as far as like, we talked about everything and she talked to me about everything. And when I moved away, I can tell that there was a little bit of a void there for her, me being far away and not necessarily accessible, because then it wasn't even just how much she had to kind of pick up the burden of like all the other drama that was going on in our family. But then I can just tell that she just felt bad, like that I just wasn't around as like a brother, like as much as I could have been. So, you know, you work on that shit too. But, nowadays, man, she's knocking it out of the park, but she's way too empathetic. And I always have to tell her, like, especially with like, when it comes to like my parents, sometimes the right answer is to just not engage. Yeah. You just need to like, just turn that off.
Sometimes when you're full of feelings, it's really hard. So there's always one in every family, you know what I mean? So.
Yep. Then you got my brother, Chris. Now this kid he's like the best of us. He's like the golden child.
This is the second to youngest.
Yeah. Okay. Second to youngest, right? This kid I knew that I didn't have to worry about him because I knew that I was basically dealing with like a kid genius. Mm-hmm. All right. So here's my anecdote story for him that'll tell you everything you need to know about Chris. I used to play Final Fantasy. Okay. By the time there's one Final Fantasy, I forget which one it is. It's like 7 or something like that, where you're like, it's still more old school with like swords and magic and not like gunships and shit like that. Typically, by the time you get to the end of that game, you're about level 40 something. Your characters are about level 40.
About Final Fantasy, but you continue.
Yeah. Well, so I'm giving you the frame of reference. This will make sense in a second. By the time you get to the end, like by the time I got to the end of the game, I was like level 40 something. Yeah. The boss fight wasn't all that hard. You know what I mean? Bam. So now I hand this game over to my brother Chris. And I was a firm believer early on that like video games, I know parents worry about them being like brain rot. Video games teach kids resilience and troubleshooting and problem solving in abstract ways way the hell earlier. Yes, if your kid's just playing Fruit Ninja all the time, he's not going to learn shit but coordination, which there's value in that. But you get your kids to play RPG games where they have to learn how to interact with other things in a virtual environment, overcome obstacles, whatever. Huge training thing. I hand this game off to this kid, and then I'm going off and I'm playing other games or whatever, right? I come back and he goes, "Hey George, come look." And he's laughing. And I'm like, "What's going on, buddy?" And he goes, "Watch this." And he loads a save game. And what I realized that I'm watching is he's at the last boss fight. All of his characters are level 99. The game doesn't let you get to 100 because it's like the 99, like, you know, the 3-digit, 2-digit thing. So all of his characters are completely maxed out. Max 99. He has 999999 gold. He has like 99999 like health potions. Like the kid just ground out. Like he did every damn thing you can do in the game. And so what he's laughing about is he gets to the last boss and it's like 2 moves. And because he's so overpowered, the boss dies in like 2 hits. Just bap, bap. And he's just laughing his ass off. And I immediately, right there, I was like, oh, this kid's going to be okay. Like this kid, like whatever he decides he's going to do, he's going to go all fucking in.
The determined, focused one.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That kid, I want to sit down and interview him. So this kid, and he's super sweet, and he's non-confrontational, right? This guy, like, he wants everybody to just get along, and he's more of a disengaged. Like, if things get hostile, he's just kind of like, and he'll just disengage me, like, and he'll kind of work around the margins and just be like, hey, where are we at with this, whatever. So it's not like he shies away from it, but he's not the guy that will get into an argument with somebody and actually try to hash some shit out, right? Just not his nature. That's cool. Quick story on him, right, is that he goes on, he's a doctor now. He's married to a damn doctor. He's got a kid, and that's a super sharp little girl too. But his adversity was, it's not like he got to go to like UCLA. He went to the same like middle school and like high school that I did. So he didn't have the credentials to go into like a full blown like med school here in the United States. That didn't stop him. So he went to Granada. There's a medical school out in Granada. So outside of the United States, he goes there, studies, becomes a doctor, anesthesiologist, and then comes back into the States to do it that way.
Awesome.
So like he didn't let academia,
See?
yeah, dude. He didn't let academia tell him like, no, sorry, you're not like, Ivy League or whatever the term is. Didn't let him stop it.
Don't worry, I'll figure it out.
He's like,
I
no.
got this.
He's like, I will put the grind in, and that kid is just like
I'm just kidding. Like,
he is,
but for all.
and this is off the top. The kid's he's just a savant that way. He just off the top knows everything about like, and he's just got good bedside manner. He's just a good kid all around. So that's Chris, and then you got Alex. Alex is the youngest, like I said. Mm-hmm. That kid's wicked smart too. He works for a company that I won't even mention on camera because he's like top clearance kind of stuff, kind of a thing. And he does like software development, like super wicked smart. And what I love about him is that here recently we've been able to bond over like coding stuff. So we're both working on a project, and because he does software development for a living, and I'm trying to code stuff for like all this AI stuff I'm working on, we're literally like bonding over code, which is kind of interesting because him and I are both kind of a little on the spectrum as far as like that whole thing, and we'll get into it. But rediscovering that relationship with him has been really nice. But I have yet to sit down with him and really get the skinny on how he viewed me during those dark ages of like when I moved to Texas and I wasn't around, right? Because I think he was a little hesitant, like as far as like when we first started engaging, because I don't know what he's learned. Like, are they all the good legends? Is it a mixture of the good and the bad? I've never really sat down and had that kind of conversation with him yet, but
It's good you guys have this relationship now. Like you're into like the same things,
it's
and
awesome.
like because even if maybe you didn't have that then, I mean, that is part of being years and years older, and you starting your life or whatever. But I think it's really cool that you guys have something like that. You guys can bond over.
Yeah, it's cool as shit. That's cool as shit. I really like that.
Both nerds, but just kidding. I love that stuff though. So that's really cool though.
Yeah, nerds in disguise. Yeah. So that's it. That's the siblings.
So you mentioned both of you were on the spectrum. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. So this is a weird one. Like I'm a weird fucking dude, and this kind of came from an era where they didn't really have words for this kind of stuff. But they call it like autistic, gifted, like they throw out there's terms, right, where it's like, was I really good at like abstract math and things like that? Yes, absolutely. Was I socially awkward? Yeah, for a long time. Like you and I having a conversation like this was something that was really difficult for me to do growing up, because a lot of times I'm staring off into space. Like I grew up kind of like off in my own world. I would sit there and play like G.I. Joes. Some kids, they go to a playground and they like want to play with the other kids. They're like, let's do Foursquare and let's play football and shit like that, right? I'd kind of do that, but I would always just kind of be in my own head. Like we'd be playing football and it's like, ready, set, hike, and I just like run, and I don't know what the fuck a route is. I don't, because I'm in my own head. I'm like, I'm participating, but I'm still like out here somewhere.
Right.
But most of the time I was just like off in my own world, like playing G.I. Joes and shit like that, right? Or like drawing or whatever the hell. And I wasn't really engaged with like kids and having conversations. I always felt like I was not in on the conversation. So like especially once you get to being like preteen age, where like kids are talking about stuff, and like there's the idea of like secrets, and did you know what Billy said, and what did Sally say, and blah blah blah, and party this and whatever. I always kind of felt like I had no idea what the hell was going on in those conversations, so I always felt like I was kind of like faking, like, you know. So like they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that party was great," and I'd be like, "Yeah, it was great. It was awesome. I don't know what you're talking about." You know what I mean? And part of that was hiding, like as far as like pretending like I had more freedom than I actually did, again because of my upbringing, and I didn't want to stand out, because at that age you don't want to stand out. Nobody wants to stand out. Whatever the hell they're saying and they're doing
with everybody else.
Yeah, like I do that too all the time. Yeah. And so there was part of that, but there was also part of it that I just didn't realize and recognize. And I here's what I don't know. I would love to sit my parents down and ask them how much they knew or didn't know or were aware of it at the time, because the science wasn't there as far as like diagnosing kids for stuff like that. They had basic stuff for like hypertension. I remember there was one kid in my class that was like hypertensive, and those are those kids that have like that nervous energy, and he had to like take medication for it, and he would kind of like, what is it, Asperger's, like kind of blurt stuff out every once in a while. But again, there wasn't like terminology for that stuff like we have nowadays. Nowadays that whole spectrum thing is like, like defined, and they have like an entire cadence for it. And so this was one of those things where it's like much later in life, I look back on myself and I go, damn, I was kind of weird. I was kind of out there. And I say weird, not in a bad way, but like, you know what I mean? Like I was not like other kids. And so there was a lot of, I guess the term nowadays is like masking, and especially in high school. So once I realized that there were sort of two dynamics that were going on socially, right? There was, I'm a nerd, so I'm going to do good at school. That was just automatic for me. Okay, cool, gifted, whatever you want to call it. But then there's also like hanging out with your friends and trying to endear yourself to friends in social circles. And some of those friends are like the cool rocker kids, or like the jocks, or the cheerleaders, or whoever I'm trying to like actually like talk to and engage with, where being a nerd is like the last thing you want to be. And so I used to try to downplay a lot of my nerdy side and almost suppress it to where I purposely would even get like shit grades. Like I would just not turn in homework. I could have done it. I could have done good on the test. And this caused a lot of stress for like my parents. Like my dad always said, like he would go, how are you not doing good? He's like, you can sleepwalk through that class. Like you have the intelligence to like sleepwalk through that class. Why aren't you doing good? And I couldn't say, because I don't want everybody to know that I got straight A's.
You don't want to stand out.
I don't want to stand out. Well, I don't want to stand out any more than anybody else. I'm sure if maybe I was at like a, fucking Xavier school for the gifted and everybody's a nerd like me, then I would have been like, check it out, guys, I got A's too. But that was not the experience in high school. In high school, everybody's just kind of like whatever. It was a public high school, so everybody's just doing whatever. Yeah. And I wanted to do whatever too, right? And so there was a lot of masking going on, and a lot of pretending like I was dumber than I was about a lot of things. And it was because I didn't want to stand out.
It's so crazy because I just like knowing you, and you talk to like everybody, and like you don't seem like you have like any like social,
not anymore,
like anxiety or fears of like starting conversations. So how did that change? Because that is like so opposite to the person that you are. You talk to everybody.
I do. And I wish I could tell you, I really wish I could like write out exactly when it happened, but I think it's somewhere along the way where you realize that there's two things to realize. First, you have to kill your ego. That's number one. And it's in the sense of, it's putting it this way. Somewhere along the way, I realized nobody actually gives a shit what you think or don't think or know or don't know. Like in other words, if I say something that's too nerdy in a conversation, I was in my own head. I always thought, oh man, I dropped some knowledge, and now all those kids are going to go home and they're going to go, that George guy, he's such a nerd. When the reality is nobody gives a shit. Yeah, nobody gives a shit. It's not that serious. It's not that big of a deal. But you know what I mean? So that's number one is killing your ego to realize that nobody, just be yourself.
Right.
Just be yourself. Right. And if you get made fun of, it's going to happen in the moment. Or the worst that'll happen is you'll be excluded from other conversations, but whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so there's that. I had to get to a point where I didn't give a shit much anymore. And then number two, there's also a lot of paranoia and fear that because I'm a sharer. Like if I go and find out something cool, like, hey, look, did you know that you could do this on your, like, I'm that guy. And I realize that doesn't always go off well, because sometimes my exuberance and excitement about showing somebody how something works against me, where they're just kind of like, you're like, are you insulting my of course I know how that works, you know what I mean? But I'm just excited that I finally discovered it, right? And so I'm like late to the game or whatever. And so there's a lot of times where I would second guess myself about sharing information or conveying things, because I thought that's stupid and nobody wants to hear it. So there's a lot of internal negative backspeak and negative feedback that comes with wanting to convey an idea that you think will be helpful in a dynamic situation, but you're your own worst critic, and so you tell yourself to shut the fuck up. Yeah. And that nobody wants to hear it and nobody cares. And George, you got the answer again? Wow, what a surprise. Oh, you look, anybody else who's not raising their hand all the time, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I started becoming hyper aware of that, and I didn't want to be like a Hermione Granger, you know what I mean, character where
know it all.
Yeah, like I really struggle with that stuff. So I always try to just like dumb that shit down and just like be like, oh, really? That's cool. And just like, you might be telling me something that I already know, and I'm like, wow, that's really fascinating. And I just let it roll. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like, but that's, I think there's a healthy amount of ego killing that everybody has to do, especially if you are a person that like that takes pride in learning about a lot of different things, right? Like you don't have to be the guy that always gives all the answers all the time, and it's okay. So I really wish I knew exactly when that happened. It's probably just an age thing, when you start to realize that adults have their own shit going on, and
you just grow into yourself and just realize that like the people that you have conversations with, like they're into the same things, because you're into like so many different things. I mean, you still haven't taken me off-roading, but you're off-roading, and you're like, there's just like so much, like, so you have like the different like groups of like people, like friendships that you built like over time, that are into the same things as you, and so that obviously makes it easier to like start conversation with people, because they're already into like the things that you're into. But that comes with age and getting to know like people, having different circles and stuff like that, so you have more confidence in like those conversations and things like that.
Yep. But a lot of the social anxiety stuff, it used to be crippling. Like nowadays I have no problems being on camera. I do presentations and shit like that, but man, that used to like, it would get my stomach like in knots if I had to like be out in front or be up in front of the class or whatever, any kind of presentation, even if it was something that I knew that I prepared for. I just, the crippling anxiety of like having people observe me convey an idea, and then in my own head, I'm assuming that everybody's going, that's the dumbest thing I ever damn heard in my life, right?
Yeah.
That was a really big struggle growing up, and I used to have days where, even in like my old job, like there would be days where I'd be so nervous about going into the office that I would literally get out of my car and I would stop like halfway there in the parking lot and just be like, fuck it, I'm gonna call in sick. Because I just didn't want to walk in the door. I just, even though that day was gonna be fine, even though that day was gonna be 100% fine, I would be like, fuck it, and I would just go call in, and then just like regroup, fucking recenter myself, and then come back later and apologize. Oh, sorry, I had to blah 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 blah.
So it's nothing you ever like you had to like get like other medication or therapy for, something you just kind of just grew out of, or you just kind of settled into like, where you didn't have as much anxiety anymore.
Yeah, no, all in the natural. Yeah, I've never been on medication or any of that stuff.
Well, I mean, kudos to those who have to. I mean, that's, I totally get that too. But having like debilitating like anxiety like that, where it affects like your job or making friends or having conversations with people growing up, like I can only imagine like how difficult that was. Because I talked to everybody.
Yeah,
I didn't have any social anxiety.
I love that. I love people that can do that. Like, because that's always so fascinating to me. It's just like, damn, you could just like pull. And what's funny is a lot of those people, they go home and they have their own anxieties, but you don't see that, right? You just see the confidence, and you go, oh man, I'm not like that.
That's why the oldies love me, because I just talked about everything. What you want to talk about? Your sweater is cute. I love them flowers. I love everything. What did you eat? Soup? That's great. What kind of soup? Like I just like talked about everything.
Yeah, that's my wife too. She loves talking to old people. Like they flock to her. They love Andy.
So kind of just going back into a little bit. So we talked about your siblings and like your mom and dad and everything. And so what are something that kind of were like delving deep into, like something that really like changed the trajectory? Was there anything that changed the trajectory into your life like that, besides like, I know what made you kind of want to fade away from the religion, but something that kind of made you, I don't know, who you are now, like any like.
Let's think. So let me talk to you about my like 19, 20, 21 going into like the now I'm an adult living on my own
Yeah.
and being able to drink, right? Because some of those fears that my mom was worried about for me, yeah, I choked through that, but it's not like all my friends did. So one of the reasons why nowadays I do not get too wild and crazy is because I got a lot of that stuff out of my system. And part of that was the fact that for a while there, especially in like my late teens, early 20s, this is going to sound really terrible, but I was allowed to like underage drink because I had like bartenders that knew me, and that's totally legal, and I will never tell their names.
Kids don't do that.
But I was exposed to a lot of that stuff pretty early, and I had friends that went off in directions that were not recoverable, and so that was another turning point for me as far as like the way that I relate to the people that I love and I care about, because there were situations. Well, let me just tell a story and then it'll kind of illustrate it, right? So I had these really good friends of mine when I got my first job at Teletech, and they were from wealthier families. And so they lived at home, and their parents basically had enough money they could do whatever the hell they want. So they were always like the party dudes, right? And so this dude had like this awesome basement with like a pool table and shit like that. And they would just have these massive parties. I never paid for anything. Like, they were cool as shit. Go there, hang out, drink, socialize, whatever. And it starts getting to where it's like slightly problematic. And even I'm like falling for like, I'm getting drunk like every damn weekend, and it's like not good. It's starting to like, black out in certain situations, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, man, this is just probably not good for my soul, right?
Right.
And then to make matters worse, that guy that lived in that house, he ends up like knocking up like a 16-year-old girl. Now, this is problematic because he's like 19. Problematic in that regard, but also problematic. But to his credit, it wasn't like he was like, oh my God, I can't believe that, and fucking like ghost her or whatever the hell. He was like, well, I guess that's my lot in life, so I guess I'm gonna marry this girl, and that's just how it's gonna have to be, right? So kudos to him on following through with that, but also not kudos to him because he was still like actively drinking. We're talking, we would wake up. So she stops drinking. She's pregnant, obviously. I remember sitting there one morning. This was probably the morning that I decided like I probably can't even hang out with these people anymore. And these were like my best friends at the time, because at that job I only knew like 5 people. We're sitting there. It's breakfast, right? And so I'm sitting in front of and his mom. So I'm sitting there at breakfast, and there's pancakes and syrup, and there's a Jack Daniel's bottle and like orange juice. And I'm literally, it's 7:00 in the damn morning, and I'm eating breakfast, and he's sitting there like sipping on his orange juice, and then every once in a while he just like pours a shot of Jack and like shoots a shot of Jack.
Damn.
No fucking joke. And I'm sitting there like, is this real life? Like, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to like be doing this like all the time like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that was one of the moments where I was kind of like, oh, this is not good. Yeah. I should probably disengage from this like entire like situation. But doing so, I felt so fucking bad that I was basically like not trying to help him see the road that he was on, that at one point I wrote a really long letter to him. I just wrote like a 2 or 3 page letter, and I was like, hey man, I really care for you, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is, you got to get out of it. You got to stop doing this stuff. You got a kid coming, like basically just trying to be a voice of reason, because it was clear that his parents were just kind of like, oh, what are we going to do with them? Right. Like, they're just,
there was obviously a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I wrote him a letter, put that in the mailbox, and then he totally ghosted me. I tried to call him like later on and like block my number and things like that. So just like, who knows what happened to those folks? But
you never he blocked
no
you?
Acknowledgement, yeah, nothing. Just blocked me, just straight up blocked me. And so that, I hope that all that stuff worked out. But that was my initiation to this idea that not everybody is in the right names in the right mind space to be helped sometimes. And even though you care about somebody and you want to help them, if it's not going to be you sometimes. It's not going to be you that actually like helps them like see it through. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because we all like all these stories where it's like, well, then I sat down and we talked it out, and then they went
my
on.
letter moved him so much to change, and and the truth is, like, all you did is when you care about somebody, you just want to help them out of something, and if other people aren't willing to step up, really that shouldn't have been like it shouldn't have been on your shoulders to do that. You know what I mean? But you obviously were seeing people surrounding him that were not doing anything, so you felt obligated as a friend, as a good person, to be like, "Hey, man, like, I care about you." Da, da. And I mean, and not everyone's ready to hear advice, and people they don't want to be helped, and it is everyone's entitled to their own paths in life, and that's fine. But that's also really hurtful when you just realize that obviously you're just trying to help somebody, and not everyone wants to accept it, and
Yep.
I mean, just gonna
And
have
that's
to,
it.
and that's it. Yeah.
That's it. 2 or 3 years that you've known these people, and that's just it. GG.
But then, I mean,
On to the next.
obviously so were you like drinking a lot at that time too? And then you realized like, hey, I don't want to
I was
do
I was
this?
still doing like the weekend, I was like the
Yeah.
weekend warrior drinker. Like I was actively participating in these parties, and they were like, out of control and shit like that too. So I dodged the bullet as far as like any kind of actual addiction.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that like, God damn, if there's one thing I'm super happy about is that as many things as I've tried in my life, I don't necessarily have an addictive personality when it comes to substances.
Yeah.
I'm addicted to like experiences. Like if there's things that I want to do, there's an addiction level there where I become obsessed and I'm not going to do them all the time, like wheeling and shit like that.
Yeah.
Right. But thank God that like substances, I've phased in and out of them. Right. I smoked for a little while, like, but it's like when I put it down, I can put it down and it's like game over.
And that's part of like being in like a high control religion too, is you want to try like when you have opportunity to try things, you're like, I want to try this, and this, so it's good that you don't have the personality where it's like you like love all that, like the bad stuff for you, because some people just go the other way around, and then that becomes part of who they are, and so I mean, kudos for you for seeing other people's experiences and being like, yeah, that's not for me, I'm gonna go the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of train wrecks along the way, because I mean, we were part of a crew of people, like, and we used to like go downtown and just get like just shit faced, and we would like, I mean, I've been in a couple of like just like straight up like fist fights and shit like that, just in an alley over like dumb shit, just young, testosterone filled kid dudes that it was just a bad time. But again, it's like it's one of those things where it's like, I thank my lucky stars that I survived all of that time, but now it explains why like nowadays I don't like. I see people going like super crazy party hard, and I'm just kind of like, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm good.
been there, done that. Nah, I'm good. Yeah. So that was like mostly like when you were
In my 20s. That was right before I moved down to Texas.
okay.
Yeah.
And then you move here, and what happened when you moved out into Texas? Like
So the impetus there was I had just gotten into I went from that teletech job where I was basically doing like tech support stuff to a startup company. And the startup company was basically like the same kind of software that you use now for like Zoom and net meeting and Skype and shit like that. This is an early version of that, and I won't bore you with the details, but I was part of the team. I started off on Q&A, but then I was teaching myself how to code and blah, blah, blah. And I eventually became like one of the developers, like one of the core developers. And they were getting traction. So this was back in the .com days where like internet companies were springing up everywhere, and there's a lot of like people, like investors, like giving money to companies that they thought were going to be like the next best thing, and we were on that track. So so I'm still in Colorado. I'm working for this company. I'm getting paid way the fuck too much money that a person my age should be making, but it was the internet days, and so it was fast and loose. And we had gotten to the point where we were about to IPO, so basically go public, which is where your shares, all the shares that they've been sort of promising you on the side, then you become like, instant millionaire or whatever the hell if the stock goes through the roof. Okay. So we're waiting for the public offering, but we needed to scale our software. We needed to make it to where, we can handle more people in these conference calls that we're basically managing for clients. And so the small team that we had of developers, like 4 or 5 of us, weren't enough to scale the software out. We basically needed an entire team. And so our CEO basically found an outfit that was in Austin, Texas, that had that guy had done some work prior on things like Amazon and like basically other things that went on to become like really big scalable software. And so the company sort of faced all of us that were still the original core engineers the dilemma of, we need to scale the software out, but we need everybody in the same place. We can't do this remote. So we want to move you to Austin. We'll pay for that. But, we'll move you to Austin and you got to check the stuff out. Now, at the time, you have to understand, would be the first person in my family to like leave, right? Because everybody in my immediate family lives in Colorado, right? So I'd be the first person to leave. I was dating a girl at the time that I was like serious with, and she was a cool ass chick. Like she was a badass girl. She was like a makeup artist. She was working for like Lancome, like Dillard's makeup, right? Cool ass chick. So I'm sitting there going, all right, well, this is gonna like uproot my entire life and move me away from my family, move me away from my friends, move me away from my girl, because I sat down with her and I said, hey, I'm not in charge of you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not the boss of you. And I want you to come with me. I would love that. But I know you've got your entire family and circle and friends here too. So like, I'm considering this. What do you think? And she was like, dang, I don't know that I could go with you. And I'm like, okay, well, that's all right.
I mean, that's fair.
It's 100% fair. And kudos to her for sticking with that. Right. So, took the plunge. Right. So first I went down to Austin and visited, and I had sort of like a wonderful experience. Like, they took me down to 6th Street. I got to see Leslie for the first time. Do you know Leslie? Have you heard of Leslie? Okay. So, picture this.
I think I know, but tell me.
Yeah. Picture this. It's 6th Street and everything's going crazy and wild and you're a little tipsy and you're walking across the street and suddenly you see what looks like Jesus with boobs.
I know what you're talking about. Yes. Yes.
That's the only way I could describe it. Because at the time when I saw it, I was like, and I paused and I was like sitting there just like we walked across the street and Leslie was sitting in like a folding lawn chair just right on the corner of like Maggie Mae's or some shit, right? And so I walked across the street and I was like, did I just see? And my buddy goes, yeah, that's Leslie. Like, everybody knows Leslie. And I was like, oh, cool. I was like, that's fucking cool as shit. And so I loved the vibe that I loved about Austin was the keep it weird aspect of it. And then what I loved about it was nobody gave a shit about your fucking status. Like, I remember walking into bars and restaurants and things like that, right? And there's like the dude in like the tie-dye shirt wearing the Birkenstocks sitting right next to the guy in like the 3-piece suit, and they're both just having a conversation. Nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
So at the time, to juxtapose that, right? At the time in Colorado, like Lodo, which is like that our version of 6th Street, like the downtown, it was super fucking elitist. Like, it was all like the super jock, like think like Tom Cruise, like the entire crew of Top Gun, like on crack. And if you didn't have like the latest like hyperbike or a Lamborghini or a Dodge Viper, then you wouldn't be caught dead like rolling down the street, because it was just all of the douchiest money people. And those are the guys that we would get in fights with. Was we would go down there as like the ruffians, right? That didn't have all the money. Anyways, so those are the two vibes. And I saw Colorado going in a very kind of like money way. And Austin was still super chill and whatever. And I was like, you know what? This is cool as shit. Like, money aside and the company aside, like this is more closer to like my people, as far as like nobody cares and everybody is just chill. And so that put a good vibe in my heart about that. This might be a good choice. It might be a good risk to take, because, you know, I've always said, like, if you're going to move somewhere and you're going to leave a lot behind, then you might as well like where you're going and not just have it be a worse place than where you were at.
Right.
If it's worse than where you're at, you might as well just stay and fucking make it work.
Yeah.
So I moved down to Austin, and that was really painful because I had to essentially break it off with my girl, you know, and it was kind of like amicable part ways. And it's kind of like, well, you know, hey, if you ever come back around, look me up, blah, blah, blah. Never heard from her again. That was literally the last conversation I ever had with her. With my family, it was a lot of like, you know, there was mixed emotions, right? Because at that point, my parents were very much reserved to the fact that I'm going to go, you know, George is going to do what he's going to do, right? Because I was always kind of exploratory and blah, blah, blah. So at that point, we had already kind of gone through we're past all of the arguments about what I'm willing to go do versus listen to my parents. And so they're just kind of like, good luck. You know, I'm sure you'll do fine, blah, blah, blah. But then like breaking away from my family, right? So now the only ones that are really old enough to really appreciate what's kind of going on there are like my brother and then my sister, right? Is about the age break off. And then everybody else, like Chris and Alexander, they're still kind of young enough to where they're just kind of like, well, I guess my brother just doesn't live here anymore, and that's just the life of it. And then ironically, what ended up happening was this was like 2000, 2001. And that's when the bottom fell out of the market. So I get moved to Austin. I would get to work for like 6 months, and then I get laid off.
Damn.
Because everybody got laid off, right? When that shit hit that winter, IBM laid off thousands of people. Motorola laid off thousands of people. Everybody laid off everybody because they started pulling, the bubble burst in the market. So not only did our company not get good to go IPO, so I was a paper millionaire, that shit all just worthless. I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones that got a severance package, because a lot of these internet companies, what they were doing was they were getting rack space inside of these data centers to like prop up their applications, but you're leasing all that shit. So you owe those people a lot of money. You're renting the equipment. You don't buy the equipment. You're renting the equipment because you're trying to prove that your shit works so that the investors come in and make it legit. So I was one of the few people that even got a severance package. There was another round of layoffs that came later where they were just like, that's it. The debtors took all the money for all the rest of the shit. There's no more money. Sorry. Good luck with your job. So where that put me was, I'm a young dude that has a little bit of programming experience, but my resume is at the bottom of a very large stack of individuals that have been doing this shit for 30 years. I mean, we're talking like when IBM lays off people in that era, dude, when IBM lays off somebody in the year 2000 that is in computer science, that man probably has a PhD. He's like a mathematician. He's not just like a code monkey. This is a dude that literally was probably been around since like the fucking card punch days, right? So my resume, my experience is absolute shit. And these guys are all super desperate because a lot of these people are older people they have families, their mortgages or whatever, right? So I couldn't even get an interview. I'm sitting there filling out like I was unemployed for an entire year. Only time in my time, I've been working since I was 14 years old. 2000, 2001 is like a weird void where I don't know if you've ever been on unemployment, but they basically make you prove that you're applying for shit. And you know what I mean? So my record would be like, I applied for like these 17 jobs and like callbacks 0, like interviews 0. And I'd be like, damn, I don't know what the hell is, you know what I mean? Like, what do I do with this? Right. And so, yeah, that was yet another moment in my life where it's just kind of like, what are you going to do, dude? Right. And I can tell you what my parents said. My parents said, oh, mijo, sorry about that. Yeah, just come home. Just come back. There's nothing for you there. You moved away from everybody. You got left high and dry. That sucks. Come back. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was stubbornness, fate, whatever you want to call it. But like, I was like, nah, I got to see this shit through. Like, I'm here. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was starting to be surrounded with like really cool people, like people that I know. This is a little bit now, we're kind of coming up on where I first like met Brandon and those guys at Dell, but not quite yet. But I was like, nope, I really feel like I belong here. Like, I feel like this is my fucking city and I got to see this through. And it was very lonely because at the time I was, by that point, I was starting to see like a new girl. But even she was kind of like, hey, man, you going to get a job anytime? You know what I mean? So there's like that kind of like
stigma. You're unemployed, but you not because you weren't trying, but that's just the way doing what you do. Yeah. They were hiring people who have been doing it for like 20 or whatever. You know what I mean?
And also just like, the stigma of like being the male without a job is like, you're basically worthless at that point, kind of a thing. You have nothing else to offer, blah, blah, blah. So there was a lot of like, there were some dark moments where I was like, I'm sitting there playing video games, but I'm like, it's because what am I going to do? And there's a prideful aspect to it too. Could I have gone and just gotten a job at McDonald's? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to deny that. And I probably should have at 8 months just been like, fuck it. I'm going to go work at Best Buy for a while until the market picks up again. But there was a part of me that was like, no, like I've busted my ass to get to where I'm at today. And this is what I fucking deserve. But the market was like, yeah, but so is all these people. Yeah. and you're just like another dude you're just another.
It's hard to meet people too. If you just moved here, you only work for so many months, 6 months. And then you're not working anymore. And you're by yourself here in a city. How do you meet new people? Because usually you meet people through work. Yeah. That's how it works. So it's probably stressful, lonely, like, you know what I mean? All those things.
Yeah. Yep. And so, And so that worked out. And so eating a slice of humble pie, Dell was kind enough. And what would happen was that Dell was still doing okay. Mm-hmm. As far as like, even after the .com bust, because they were already established and they were selling computers, right? And what was happening at the time was they were trying to consolidate. Dell used to have a very big division between all their desktop computers and then all their laptops. Those were two very distinct things. And they were trying to combine them from a tech support perspective. And so they had this giant job fair where they just wanted phone people, tech support people. So literally like entry level, like answer questions about the computer, help them troubleshoot, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm sitting there with my resume that shows that I have like, like already years of like development experience. And I'm like, can I answer troubleshooting questions about a laptop? I can answer questions about a fucking laptop. But what I told myself was, all right, this is maybe like a 1 step back, 2 steps forward thing where Dell, I at least recognize as a large enough outfit that if I can just get my damn foot in the door, then all the other jobs that I want, if I want to get back into software development, if I want to go wherever, they've got that too.
Yeah.
And so that was my angle was, okay, this is a big enough company. I just got to get in.
Yeah.
I just got to nail the interview. And this was my first time like really having to put myself out there and be, again, going against my like anxiety about talking with people or whatever, because in a one-on-one interview, sometimes like in the past, I would kind of like freeze up a little bit as far as like people would ask me questions and I'd be like, oh, I don't know, like what answer do you want me to give you, blah, blah, blah. And this was the first time that I really I felt so overqualified that it made me relaxed. I wasn't nervous. Like I was like, oh, I'm worthless and you're never going to hire me till like, of course I'm going to get this damn job.
Yeah.
So the person that interviewed me was this lady. Oh, God, I wish I could remember her name. It was like Melanie or something like that. So they give you this worksheet and you fucking fill. It's like 20 questions on basic stuff about laptops or whatever, and that's the first round. So if you get above a certain score, then you actually get to sit down. But it's like speed interviews, so it's not like a callback thing. And I'm in line with like 100 people in this damn line. I was there all afternoon, and this is out over at Building 7, by the way, like way back in the day. So I walk in, hand in my worksheet. The dude there grades it, and he's like, cool. And then I just get into this queue, and I walk into this little like one-on-one room, and Melanie's sitting across from me. And so I don't know why I did this, but she goes, all right, well, yeah, looks like you did good. And she's like, dang, you listed like all 3 ways that you can get into Windows safe mode. She's like, I only knew about 2 of these. And I was like, oh no, yeah, you can hold the shift key while it's booting up, and then
Let me teach you something during the interview process.
So I started nerding out, and then I was kind of like, wait, dial it back, and so I don't know what compelled me, but like in the interview, I was like, Melanie, listen, I'm gonna be able to do this job like super simple. Like I promise you, like look at my resume. I was like, I am struggling to get a job. I'm a software developer. I'm a coder by nature. I was like, so, can I do the job for you? 100% could do the job for you. But if you have any way that you can like get me in the door and get me doing like special projects, doing coding stuff and get me back on track, then I would really appreciate that. And it worked out because she goes, oh, really? She goes, huh? Well, IT just basically scooped up all the developers and brought them into IT. There used to be this thing that happened back in the day where like if you were a coder in a big corporation, you were supposed to be part of IT.
Yeah.
Right. And you couldn't have like a business unit sitting out, like sales couldn't just have like a team of coders just off doing willy-nilly shit and making new applications and things like that, because then it's like you can't control that.
Right.
And so what would happen is businesses want to operate quickly, and so they would do what's called shadow IT, which is I pay some people to code some shit under the table and we just don't talk about it. And it's like, oh, look at our productivity, it's through the roof. And they're like, oh, how are you doing that? And you're like, oh, it's all magic. And so you pretended like these certain applications didn't exist, and then usually IT finds out about it and they either agree to support it or they do what they did, which is they had come up with a bunch of tech support applications that were being supported by the business, and they had gone in and said, nope, shut all that shit down, and they took all those people that had those jobs and brought them into IT.
Right before you did the interview?
Yeah, so there was a void.
That's so crazy.
So it fucking just panned out that there was a void in tech support, and she saw it like from a managerial perspective. She's like, oh, cool. I'll get another little shadow IT guy. You know, I'll get a shadow developer in on my team, and we'll basically like be back in business. And so it worked out. But so that was the first time that I was ever in an interview where I literally just blew past the like, here are the 4 things that I've done to be effective and the star and all that other crap, and just said, look, here's what I can do for you.
This position I applied for is not really what I want. I want this, this, and this. But it's good that, What did my husband say? Closed mouths don't get fed. So you just gotta,
Yeah,
gotta ask.
that's good. That's good wisdom right there, right? And so that was sort of the first intro to like, damn, like you have to like, again, going back to like the coming out of your shell and being like more socially aware. It's like, one of the hallmarks of sort of like nerds. I don't even think it's like an autism thing. It's more like just being a nerd. Is that a lot of people out there that are that do technical things or do detailed things, the assumption is that the work will speak for itself. That's the misunderstanding. They think that the work will speak for itself. They'll say, "Well, you don't have to talk to me. Look at all this shit that I've done,"
Right.
and that everybody else will just look at the work and go, "Oh, wow!" And look at all the, and then, dude, bravo, bravo, bravo. And the reality of the situation is, it doesn't work like that. It only works like that to other nerds. It only works like that to other people that know what the fuck to look for. But in most cases, you could be like, "Look at all this shit I did," and everybody goes, "No idea what I'm looking at, but could you tell me about it?" And so you have to know when to put that beside and be like, "Oh, damn. All right. Well, here's what I can do for you." Right. It's positioning yourself in terms of like, here's why this is useful to you. Here's why this is important for you. And that is something that I don't even know where the hell you learned that. I don't know if there's a class that teaches that shit, but that's one of the things that I had to get good at, so that I could have probably ended up just being like a code monkey, again, just working in a quiet corner and just producing things for the rest of my life, and never really selling myself or projecting myself out there to take the things that I wanted as far as like career opportunities.
Right.
Because you got to sell yourself. You have to market yourself. Nobody else is going to do it.
And if you wouldn't have done that, like, I mean, you getting that job help you meet people who are still in your life today and all these things. So it's like just one like action on you, just speaking up for yourself, selling yourself, overcoming your social anxiety and like all these things, like kind of changed like a whole like trajectory into your life too.
That was one of the most getting a job at Dell during the recession like that was probably the biggest turning point, because that is what literally put me on the path of not just career wise getting back to what I was wanting to do, but also meeting all of these amazing people. Like that's where I met Brandon. Like, so I came a little late to the party as far as like, so in tech support, they have tiers, like level 1, level 2, blah, blah, blah. Right. So level 1 support is like, you're just the frontline person. You answer the calls, you answer questions, blah, blah, blah. If it's too hard for you or you need some expertise, then you get to a queue with like a level 2 person. And so Brandon and those guys, a lot of them were already level 2 dudes, and they just saw me as sort of like, a rising star as far as like, he's nailing his metrics and blah, blah, blah. And so I was already kind of gauging myself to do more L2 stuff anyways. Right. And so I got to hang out with them. And I got to the party a little late, and I say late because y'all got to do a bunch of cool shit and party and travel. And by the time I made it into that role, y'all ruined it, and they put the kibosh on all that shit. And I didn't get to go to no Panama.
They'll tell you the stories about it later.
I know. But at the time, like when we started becoming homies, right? They're just like, "Oh, dude, just wait, man. We go to Panama, we rent cars and stuff like that." And I'm just kind of like, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." And then when I get in, they're like, "Nope, no corporate credit cards anymore. Y'all can't be trusted with that shit." Like they had fun, but they broke all the rules and
ruined the opportunity for you.
But I wouldn't have it any other way. It was probably for the best. So. So that was it. And then, I mean, as far as the rest of my career, we could probably take a break and talk about that shit. But, that was, again, it's like the recurring theme. It seems like if I have anything to offer, it's just the fact that, man, sometimes life will put you in situations where you've got to make a hard decision, and the light at the end of the tunnel might sound like a freight train. Right. I know it's a Metallica quote. Don't kill me, but sometimes you've got to be able to face certain situations even with the uncertainty, and just trust that you're going to make good decisions, and trust that people around you that have your best interests will help you along the way. Because I can say that I did all that on my own, but that's not the case. There were people, countless people along the way that I could recite that influenced me and gave me the reassurance that I was on the right path. And it was meeting them that made me feel good about the fact that I didn't just go home and just go do whatever back in Colorado.
Right. You stayed and you figured out your own path here. You didn't leave, which would be probably the easiest thing to do.
It would have been the easiest thing to do.
But you stuck it out, and look at you now. And I met you, and
yeah.
here
What's
we
the
are.
trade-off, right? But so let's close off on that, right, for a second. Is what's the trade-off? The trade-off is I sacrificed a lot of family time, right? So
Yeah.
there's a bittersweet sadness that comes with a lot of that stuff, because as awesome as that was for me, and my friends are my family, as much as that is the case, my family's slightly less my family because of that. And that's just because you can't be in two places at once.
Right.
And so I've spent a lot of time over the last decade or so trying to reclaim that time and really trying to over aggressively like be there for my families and emails and text messages and visiting and things like that, because I realized that while I was in the heat of it, like as a young man trying to get my career on track and doing a lot of this stuff, I did have to put a lot of that stuff on the back burner. And when my parents were having a meltdown or my family was going through some shit, there were times where I could only just offer a couple of emails worth of advice, but I wasn't there. Like I wasn't sentiently there, like actively in the family stuff, trying to work stuff out.
I mean, you're
And so,
figuring things out on your own, and honestly, all we can do now is just take the time that we have now and just make up for it and build different type. Maybe it's a different type of relationship than you would have had, at 18 or 19 or whatever, but it's still a beautiful relationship that you're evolving now. Like you still have all this time, so you have to take the opportunity to, build or mend relationships or build it for what it is now, and don't look back to like wasted time, because you deserve your own time, your own life, your own path. You do. So just everybody else does. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just evolving your relationships now as adults, and that's exciting because now you know who you are, and now you get to see people for who they truly are, and you get to build these like new friendships and relationships. So it's a beautiful thing. So and kudos to you for talking about all this, and we can always continue on about everything else that happened, and just all the exciting things that happen in your life, and getting to meet you and your beautiful wife Andy, and but just thank you for talking to me about everything. It's so nice to get to know you know what I mean? It's exciting, and I'm just glad that you opened up, and I appreciate you, friend.
oh, thank you so much.
Love you, friend.
And thank you all. I mean, I love you guys. I really do. Thanks for tuning in.